though it has been a crazy roller coaster of a year, it has been without a doubt one of the most vibrant and exciting times, I would say, in my life. Because once you jump off a cliff, especially that initial first cliff that you're just deathly afraid of, I've found at least that when I've had to jump off other cliffs that have followed, it gets just a little bit easier every single time.
Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Work Podcast. I am your host, Dan Krikorian. Each episode, we feature a special guest from all walks of life, and we ask them to explore the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the trials and the triumphs of their chosen field. Writers, musicians, coaches, business owners, and everything in between. We peel back the curtain to hear their stories, to walk their paths, to find out how they breathe life into their beautiful work. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 21 of the Beautiful Work Podcast. Today features Claire Van Holland, a great story, gives an unbelievably inspirational interview. Can't wait to get to her. Quickly, before we do, if you are new to the podcast or you've been a follower and a fan, if there's anything you could do today to help us out, please go to iTunes and like and leave a review of the Beautiful Work Podcast. We are daily getting new listeners and new people that are following, and that is all because of the help of those of you that have gone and liked and left a review on iTunes. It helps other people that are interested in this kind of podcast find it and follow along and become part of our community. Quick announcement with music. For those of you just new to the podcast, also a musician, and we just released our 5th full-length album called Grandeur, and it was just recently called one of the top 10 albums of the year by Roots Time in Europe, and the reviews are continuing to come in, especially in Europe, with the album, and we're excited about everything going on with it. I'll be on tour in Europe in a few months. Most of July will be over in Germany and the Netherlands, and so we'll talk about that more on an upcoming podcast. But for now, if you have not had a chance to check out my music, that is the other part of what I do besides podcasting and coaching college basketball and teaching at Chapman University. I also musician, and we are getting into the heart of music with a lot of shows coming up with the band. And so please head over to iTunes or Spotify or our website and check out Grandeur. You can just type in my name, Dan Krikorian, and all the albums will pop up, and you can stream or download that as well. If you want to come see us live, we have kind of a every 2-week residency coming up at Pacific City in Huntington Beach, a beautiful place to play. May 4th, May 25th, 1 to 3 p.m. Those are both Saturdays at Pacific City. And then June 8th from 5 to 7 p.m. at Pacific City. Right outside on the ocean deck. We had a blast there last Sunday, and we'll be back over the course of the next couple of months. Enough with the news. Claire gives a great interview and is a lot of fun to talk to, and you're really going to enjoy her story and her inspiration behind all she does. So without further ado, let's get to the show. Claire Van Holland is the founder and principal of CD Ledger, a modern accounting and data analytics firm based in Southern California. A creative first who happens to like crunching numbers, Claire is a self-described 50-50 left brain, right brain split. She fell into data analytics, financial projections, and budget forecasting over the course of an extensive career in corporate media, which includes Pandora Media, Disney Interactive, and MySpace Media, to name a few. After co-founding Carved, a furniture design business with her husband Aaron in 2011, Claire realized she could provide more impact by using her corporate analytics experience to help other creatives achieve financial autonomy through collaboration. Claire is here today to talk about jumping into the great unknown as an entrepreneur, balancing her creative and analytical sides, and rediscovering her passion for dancing. Okay, I am joined now by Claire Van Holland. Claire, thanks so much for coming on the Beautiful Work podcast. It's great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
There's a ton to talk about with you and your life and all these different interests and things that you do on a day-to-day basis. But I read somewhere that you're from the state of Michigan. Is that correct?
That is. I am born and raised Michigander, as they call us.
Michigan has a lot of kind of big time sports teams. Do you have an allegiance to any collegiate or professional sports team from the state of Michigan?
The only one I would say that I had any kind of tie to was maybe... not maybe. It was definitely the Detroit Pistons.
Okay.
Basketball, I think, is probably the only sport that I take a bigger amount of interest in. And I think that's partly due to when I was growing up, that was the season of the Bad Boys, the original Bad Boys.
Right.
So growing up with that was very, very much a thing. Huge point of excitement as a little kid. And then to see the second iteration of the Bad Boys come back up again in the early 2000s was pretty exciting as well. So
yes.
Pistons for sure have an affinity in my heart.
Yeah, and they're on the brink of being pretty good again. They're kind of like getting back to, they're definitely not where they were back in those couple of eras, but they right now, I'm an NBA guy and basketball guy, and they're just kind of creeping back into the Eastern Conference scene. So we'll keep an eye on, see if they can make the playoffs this year and see what they can do.
Interesting. That is very interesting.
Let's talk about all the stuff that you do. And I guess maybe the one way to get into it is, what does a typical day look like for you?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So a typical day. I am a huge believer in staying physically fit. And so a really great day will always start with a 7:30 a.m. workout. And so I go to hot yoga. I used to be deathly afraid of hot yoga just because of the sweating, and always thought I might pass out, which is, the conception that most people have. But I found that after the first few times of going, it actually felt almost euphoric by the end. And not being able to pass out was a plus, right? So I almost feel like in some sense I get even more of a workout because I'm sweating so much more. It's so bizarre, but I never thought I'd ever say that, or never thought that I would take a liking to a hot workout, 105 degrees or hotter. And, but I actually quite like it. And I feel like I've heard it from several sources that being able to sweat in that way is actually really, really beneficial on so many levels. So it starts off with a good workout, lots of hydration, of course, and nourishment, because if I don't eat and drink almost soon after the workout, then I'm also no good.
Right.
So, and then after that, I'll typically start digging into emails. Now, I always look at like the lower hanging fruit, just because after a workout, it's a little bit of that euphoria feeling. So being able to just sit down and park and concentrate for long periods of time isn't really something that I can do so well, at least not after a workout. So I'll start with emails and kind of just keep the work relatively light, and then start digging into the deeper work going into the afternoon, if it isn't a day that I open up to having meetings or calls, as I designate different days of the week for that. And then typically end the day really, and I break up the day, as much as I possibly can. And I know that I start getting a little antsy when I when I stop working, essentially. And getting just easily distracted. And so, whether it's just going outside for a few minutes and just getting a breath of fresh air, taking a quick walk around the block, it always kind of just leaves me with a fresh perspective. And I hit back and, keep working until the time that Aaron comes home. And then it's important to us to always have dinner together. So one of us will make dinner, and then just try to keep the mind off of work as much as possible, assuming it's not a particularly busy season for me. Right now it is. So it's mostly a lot of intermittent work in between many things, but mostly that's what an ideal day would look like. And, give or take, maybe there's like some socializing, in the evenings on some occasions, but yeah, that's pretty typical.
So this would probably be a good time to, I guess, introduce what the different ventures are that you are involved in. So maybe I'll let you talk about the different, your own business that you have, and then the business as well that you have with your husband, Aaron.
Yeah, sure. I'm actually going to start with the business I have with my husband, Aaron, because we've had that for maybe 8 years or so by now. In fact, it might even be longer. I lose count because it's been so long. But we met, because it's one of those stories, we met working together in corporate media maybe like 12, 13 years ago. And when we met and got together, we ultimately knew that at some point in time, we wanted to leave our jobs and eventually build a life as entrepreneurs, working for ourselves and dictating, our day to day, and just really shaping what we thought, was going to be a better and more chosen iteration of our lifestyle. So fast forward to about 8-9 years ago, we started toying around with flipping vintage pieces, and maybe going to estate sales and reselling, and at first it was just like a fun, side hobby that we did. We just loved collecting old, beautiful things. And that eventually segued into repurposing vintage. And so if we found something that was beautiful but in disrepair, we would find a way to repurpose it and make it beautiful and usable again. And then we started selling those pieces. And that soon turned into eventually beginning to build our own furniture, I guess, in some sense. And about that time, as serendipity would have it, his grandfather, who lives in Oregon, and Aaron did grow up in Oregon growing up for most of his life, reached out and let us know that he was burning down their dairy barn. that he grew up in, and all of the wood that came with it. And so Aaron took the opportunity to stop him and say, listen, we're actually thinking of really legitimately starting this furniture business together. And I would like to go up there and take that wood and repurpose it and start building furniture from it. So that's exactly what he did. He took down the entire barn with the help of his father and his brother and trucked down, over the next several years, loads and loads of reclaimed Doug fir, which we made, all kinds of stuff. I mean, we were making custom furniture, all kinds of custom pieces. And that eventually led to creating a reclaimed wood furniture line, which we did for, I would say, up until about 2017, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And, and then we eventually, and most recently, started rethinking the business a little bit, and now are focusing on only creating these wood modular wall panels, and they're functional, but they are also design centric. And what we're hoping to be a really nice design solution, for folks of, across the board. It's hard for people to make decisions around the kind of artwork that they want to put up in their home, which I completely understand. And so this is a nice option for folks who can't quite make the decision. But then the beauty is that it also serves a function. There's so in the panels we also offer cabinets that are, again, all modular in design, and it's beautiful. We love it. We're super excited about it, and that's been a large part of Aaron's focus, especially as of late. And so in the midst of doing all of this, when he was working full time for the business, and that's been, I would say at this point, for the majority of the last 8 years, he really has been carrying the weight of the furniture business together. I kept my corporate job in corporate media, where my function served primarily as sort of a financial planning and analysis role. Really, it was a lot of planning budgets and crunching numbers and understanding how and where and when to make money and to grow a business, which going into that role, I knew would be valuable at some point. And in some sense, I looked at that as this is an opportunity to almost, in some ways, earn an MBA, but get paid for it, because the nature of the work and the role really was essentially all of those things that you do learn within an MBA program. And so I cut my teeth just learning, I don't have a formal accounting background. I kind of did a mini segue within my time in corporate America, knowing full well that that was going to be of some kind of value at some point down the line. So I learned everything I could about, and everything from data aggregation to using data to drive analytics and strategy and make better and more informed decisions. And so in the midst of this, while we were also doing our furniture company, or while we were starting our furniture company, we started talking a little bit about how to start looking at our own small business analytics and how we could better optimize, certain things like costs and how to potentially increase our margins and, how to make some of our expenditures a little bit more efficient and try to run a very lean organization, especially given that we were putting all of our own money, as capital to build the business. Mm-hmm. And so it was really in doing and applying some of the things that I had learned, through my work in corporate against our small business, that in the process of it, it occurred to me, I bet that there's a lot of other small creative businesses out there who don't have access to this skill set. I mean, I just happen to have it because, that's what I was doing for work. And knowing creatives, because I also consider myself a creative, knowing creatives, they probably don't want to sit here for hours on end running Excel formulas to figure out,
right.
what the next best decision is. So it was a little bit of an epiphany in that moment. And I realized that I could provide value to other small businesses and creatives in this way. And after doing a little bit of my due diligence and research, I realized that the entry point to being able to work with small businesses in this way specifically was to take up more accounting, more of the transactional day-to-day accounting and bookkeeping. And so over the course of, I think it was like 6 to 8 months, I kind of just stopped everything. And I mean, everything as in distractions, socializing, all of that sort of thing. And really focused my time to just cutting my teeth on learning the basics of small business accounting, what that looks like, what people, will spend, a long time, potentially years, studying, and just so I could at least wrap my head around like the logistics of
right.
what it took to support a small business from an accounting standpoint. And so once I got all of those basics down, and there was a program I went through, it was great. I launched my business, and the beauty was that because we had already had our furniture business for a couple years, I was already pretty well entrenched within the creative community to some degree. And I knew that I wanted to only work with creatives specifically. Okay. Just because there's, creatives require a certain level of attention. And I get it, because at some point I myself was on the other side and I wanted that, and so ultimately it was very easy right off the bat. As soon as I sent out an email to my own network of creatives, I immediately got 2 clients, which I was like, okay, that's a pretty good sign that there is a need for this thing. And then the other frustration too is that in my experience, and I think a lot of people can probably resonate and relate to this scenario, is that when I've worked with accountants or CPAs in past years, it was always a very one-dimensional, transactional only kind of relationship. And there are certain sides to that relationship that I don't know if it's because of, my generation or what that expectation is, I'm not sure. But, I want to know that when I receive a certain piece of mail from the IRS or something from the state of California that I don't fully understand, that I can talk to somebody and they can reassure me to some sense that A, I'm not going to get arrested, B, I'm not going to owe, tens and thousands of dollars. And to be able to get that answer simply was almost impossible. It was, any number of phone calls and emails and just, on repeat until I could finally get a hold of a person to tell me, okay, we'll make an appointment and then we'll tell you. And so going through that from the other side, I realized the other thing that I want to achieve with CV Ledger is that I don't want to be that person. I want to be able to provide some level of peace of mind for anyone that I work with. You know what? It's going to be okay. And no, you're not going to get arrested. I mean, it takes a heck of a whole lot for that to happen, by the way. But, money has a stigma, certainly. And I think the biggest thing that people need, in addition to getting organized and all of those things, is really, to feel that there's somebody there that supports them, and that can make them feel a little less icky about money in some way, shape, or form. And so that from that point on really became the ethos around which I built the accountancy. CD Ledger. And I've had that now for March will be my third year in business. So, and then last year I finally, after building up enough of a client base, left corporate America for good and have been doing this full-time CD Ledger full-time for a year, which has been great.
Yeah. And congratulations on that. That is difficult to do, to get to that point where you can feel comfortable enough to leave something behind. Can you remember the feeling a year ago leaving corporate America on your own? Was it a mixed feeling of a lot of different emotions, or were you just ready to go and you knew and you were off and running?
It was a mix of many, many emotions. And it's funny because I almost pinpoint that point on to be the beginning of this major roller coaster of emotions. I'm not a particularly emotional person by nature. I'm just not. But being an entrepreneur and then all of a sudden being faced with so many new things and and unknowns, even more so, you can't help but bring about this range of emotions, hitting you in all sense of the word, And so I remember the day, because the way that I left corporate, I had actually raised my hand knowing that there were going to be a series of layoffs. And I had a wonderful relationship with my then boss, who is now just a dear friend of mine. And I'd given him a heads up. I was like, listen, this thing that I'm doing on the side, it's really picking up traction. And January, I know, is a very, very busy season. It's tax season. And though I am not somebody who files taxes, just the very association with preparing statements for everybody to get all that ready for income tax submission, I'm going to be very, very busy. So I want to give myself the time and space. And so he was like, great, there's going to be a round of layoffs. Get yourself a severance package. It'll be great. And so when the day came for them to officially let me know, it's funny, I was actually at a networking event. And luckily it was at a networking event where I was in close company with friends who I had kind of known and built up over the past year. So it wasn't in a room full of strangers, thankfully. But they called me while I was at this event. And, it took maybe about 10, 15 minutes up on the side to just kind of go through the logistics of, okay, now you're officially getting laid off and here's the package and here's what to expect. And at first it was, as soon as I got off the phone, it was a moment of shock a little bit. You're sort of just like, oh my gosh, this moment that I've been anticipating in my head for months and months, maybe even years, has finally come, and it's literally happening right now. And I was almost just numb. And I walked back into a room, and this was, this networking event was a female centric entrepreneur working event. Okay. And so there was a section where everyone's going around in a circle and kind of just talking about their thing. And I hadn't actually gone yet. So earlier and prior to the layoff call. And so when they got to me, it was, and this is not a thing that I do. Just let me preface this first. I'm not huge on the crying in public for myself personally. I mean, I get that, people need to express their emotions. And, it was probably one of the few times in my life where like I cried in public because it was just like this moment, this like very deep, like monumental moment that I had been waiting for a very, very long time. And then all of a sudden the realization of it hit me. And so when they were like, so talk about what's going on with you. It was like, well, that's a really loaded question. And here's what's going on. Yeah. And so there were a couple tears and, shared and it was a wonderful, everyone was clapping, everyone was like, that's amazing, so it was wonderful. Sad as well, because it was the end of an era. I mean, the job that I left, the position that I left was very comfortable. I mean, if we're talking, the most comfortable that you could get in a corporate environment where I had the support of all of my managers and I had a role that I essentially designed for myself. I mean, it was it was pretty good, and so to walk away from something that I had even just within a large organization built for myself was pretty tough, very emotional. But, since that point, I mean, honestly, I look back and though it has been a crazy roller coaster of a year, it has been without a doubt one of the most vibrant and exciting times, I would say, in my life. Because once you jump off a cliff, especially that initial first cliff that you're just deathly afraid of, I've found at least that when I've had to jump off other cliffs that have followed, it gets just a little bit easier every single time, which I value.
Wow.
And what it's done for me as a person and for my character has made me just a little bit less fearless, to take risks and to really open myself to whatever opportunities are out there. So It's been wonderful. Very exhausting, absolutely. More exhausting than I would have to say I've experienced in any other year of my life, but it has also just been filled with so much wonderful opportunity, wonderful people, just so vibrant. And it, I can honestly say that it is definitely a life worth living when you can move past those fears and really start to open yourself up in this way.
I want to ask you about, because what I think is really interesting about, by the way, that was just I loved hearing about the path of the last couple of years. And I want to ask about, and you say kind of in your bio and about section about having this sort of 50-50 analytical and creative sides of your brain. And I think it's really interesting because I know exactly what you're talking about when you're saying working with creatives. Myself being a musician and working with music people all the time, like I understand exactly what you're talking about. But on the other side of things, I'm also a college basketball coach and professor and really much dealing with analytics and, hard and fast rules. And so I get kind of being in both places. How do you balance sort of the two sides of your brain to make it all work together for the things that you do?
Yeah, I try to find the split within each. So it's easy. It's becoming easier for me to compartmentalize, right? And so with CD Ledger, outside of working with creatives and really being intentionally surrounding myself with that energy, I knew full well that running an accountancy for creatives doesn't mean just this sort of like black and white transactional relationship. I wanted to give value by, from what I had said earlier, just being able to give peace of mind to whomever I'm working with. And as for creatives, I know that most people, I will just say in general, really don't enjoy looking at a spreadsheet. Unfortunately, that is the way and the format in which many of financial statements come in. And so when I was in corporate America, one of the things and one of the topics that I had really started getting pretty interested in was data visualization. There's a lot that can be done, and it can get super in depth and complex, but for all intents and purposes, for working with a small business, it's really all relatively simple.
Okay.
It's being able to create data and visualize it for folks in a way that it tells a story, so that you're not sitting there reading row after row and column after column of numbers, which, I also do provide, just as, as an aside,
yeah.
But to be able to go, okay, so this is how the month of January looked, and visually, here's all of the expenses and here's, kind of what the visualization around your cash flow has looked like over the course of the year, or, here's how your revenue has looked and how it ties, or how it stacks up against, some of the direct costs that you use to build, your business. I think that looking at things in that way is a lot more valuable than just simply handing someone a spreadsheet.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
going, well, what do you think?
Right.
Enjoy, have at it, and so that was really one of the biggest things that when I started CV Ledger, I wanted to focus on, was to be able to deliver information to my clients in such a way that would resonate.
Okay.
And that made it, again, a little bit less anxiety filled.
Right.
So to visualize it in these beautiful graphs, I think helps, and then there are other things I do too. I mean, I don't have an office. I work from home. That's for several reasons. One, because I really do believe in running a very lean organization. Personally, I think it's that way. But then secondly, it gives me an opportunity to meet with clients, every so often, and maybe we'll do something off the cuff. My husband and I are members of the Huntington Gardens in Pasadena / San Marino.
Cool.
And so sometimes I'll take clients, there, and we'll go for tea and we'll talk about money, and maybe we'll have a glass of champagne, and it's really just putting us, me and the client, in environments in which are a little bit more conducive and comfortable to talking about money. It's not just a conference call all the time. I mean, Sure, we can't meet every single month in person, but, it is important to me to be able to engage, in things like this. And, to be able to, actually, one of my clients, she's really into beauty. So we went to the spa together and we were talking about strategy for 2019, and so being able to do things a little bit less, kind of out of the box, I guess, is something that I've come to find that my clients do appreciate in our working together. Sure. And so, I really protect those relationships. I value them. I also am not really looking to become the next H&R Block by any means. I love the relationship aspect of what I do. I never thought I would ever say that. It's crazy. The things that you find when you're taking leaps by the day. The other thing is, so last year when I decided to go full time with CV Ledger, I knew that I was going to need some kind of balance for myself, because knowing how much of a workhorse I have a tendency to be, I knew that I needed something else to just kind of keep the scales, kind of at a good place and completely balanced, or not. I don't think anything can be completely balanced at any given time, but more or less, right, over the course of, in my work. And so one of the things that I had done creatively since I was little is I'm a classically trained dancer. Never went into it professionally, only because I've always been a little bit more left brain focused in that way, that I could never envision myself being a starving artist, which is what my perception of being an artist, period, was growing up. So I always did it as a hobby, despite having pretty heavy amounts of dance training, in all styles. And so the opportunity leading up to 2018 kind of popped up again. I mean, I had over the years just kind of, toyed with going to dance class here and there just for fun, for a workout, things like that. But I had another one of those very strange and serendipitous moments where I came into contact with somebody and kind of just half mentioned, I'd be interested in, doing some performance again. And I don't know, it was very random. It was just kind of I had met this person for the first time also. And then all of a sudden the conversation blossomed into this, well, if you want to go into performing, here's what you do. And they essentially gave me a playbook, kid you not, a playbook on all of the things, who I should study with and how I should get into it and things I needed to do to start performing dance, you know, and the way that I was looking to do. And it was very strange because I was like, that's weird because I wasn't actively looking for that. But the timing of this is really good.
Yeah.
And after giving it some deep thought, I was like, well, maybe this is the opportunity for me to really see where this goes. I mean, who knows? I mean, I have no clue, but I think that if I only focus on CV Ledger, then I'm probably going to get burnt out on it because that's happened to me before when I only had one singular focus and, you know, it's not healthy. So I took this person, now my friend's advice and, you know, did my diligence, found the teacher, started studying under them. And then that led to performance. And then it led to more performances. And by the end of last year, I had averaged just over, I mean, it's probably like 1.5 performances per month in 2018, which is crazy because I had no plans really to do that. But it was wonderful. So it was a nice balance to the analytical work, you know, that building the business, and, you know, and I don't really look at it as a money-making endeavor so much as it's just a purely soul-feeding hobby that brings me joy.
The author Lois Bujold once said, "It's a bizarre but wonderful feeling to arrive dead center of a target you didn't even know you were aiming for." One of the exciting things about getting to interview people like Claire is that I'm never quite sure where a simple question or a conversation might lead. Where the target of the interview truly lies. Everyone has these hidden doors that, when found, often lead to worlds of astonishing passion, joy, and a freer, perhaps truer self. To be honest, when I reached out to Claire about an interview, I was planning on having what I hoped would be an interesting conversation about being an entrepreneur and the unique wood-making business she runs with her husband Aaron. And for sure, we have. But I had no idea about her passion for dance, and more importantly, how that passion has changed her life, and as she stated, is a soul-feeding hobby that brings me joy. The author Patanjali once said about joy and work, "When you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bounds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person than you ever dreamed yourself to be." What are some of the things that you learn about yourself as a classically trained dancer? Like what skills that you need to be a classically trained dancer that are transferable to you being the founder and running your own company?
Yeah, I really love that question. and I have an immediate answer for you. Right. In dance, we always look at the line that the body creates. You want a full line always. That's what makes beautiful dance, is to be able to execute a long line and extend it. And the only way to really achieve longer lines is flexibility and some level of physical agility. So in the course of my really starting to focus on performance over the last year, I started working on my own physical flexibility. I mean, I'm relatively flexible, but this is really the first time I've focused on pushing it to another level so that I can achieve the lines that when I see them in my mind, when I hear a piece of music, I can execute that line without even thinking about it. And then the translation to business is to always stay flexible, just mentally, and really be ready for any changes. Flexibility and agility in state of mind when running a business is so, so important. And a really good example of that was last year. And this is actually fairly recently. I had a perception of how I wanted to build the business structurally in terms of staffing and resources and all of that. And so for a long time, and I would say the majority of last year and even leading up to, last year, so 2017 as well, I always thought, well, I want one employee full time and everyone else I'll contract out to. And the one employee will act as sort of a manager, or not a manager, but an assistant to me. And then eventually I'll grow, that role and that career, that position, into being more of a managerial role. And so that was kind of my major plan all along. And then I had hired an employee at the beginning of last year, and she did exactly that. She was my assistant, all these things. And come the end of the year, she ended up leaving the company, and it was a little bit of a blindside for me. I wasn't expecting it at all, and so there was a period of time, a couple of weeks, definitely very tough. Because when you're not expecting it and you run a very small operation and then all of a sudden everything falls on you all over again, it's tough. And especially going into tax season. My season doesn't begin in January. It actually begins in December. And so it was in the midst of everything just kind of starting to pick up traction and momentum. And then that happened, and it was just like, oh man, this isn't good. How am I going to do this all on my own? Yeah. And after giving myself the time and space to go through the emotions of the situation, it became clear to me that actually I had a much better opportunity in front of me, which was I decided right then and there I didn't want to have an assistant anymore. That in fact, if I hired anybody moving forward, it would probably be on a contract basis, and it would be only hires who were more versed than myself in accounting, to ensure the efficiency of the operation, and then also to minimize the liability, because my assistant was handling a lot of accounts. And so when she left, I had to really just put everything aside, pick up the pieces and just catch back up on everything myself. Right. Okay. But being flexible and open to the opportunity that presented itself, I think is so, so important as a business owner. Just keeping an open mind, staying flexible and not being so held to any one way of doing things.
I like that. I like that answer. What's one of the best investments you feel you've made in your career?
I would say giving myself an opportunity, any opportunity to learn from others. Every single time that I've done that, in whatever iteration that's taken, has always come back to me in ad infinitum, honestly. There's always an opportunity to learn from someone, somewhere, somehow. And I think I will never stop learning, but then to be especially more so cognizant of learning from people who have the resources, have the background and the experience, that you can learn yourself from. It's invaluable, honestly. So this has kind of come in the form of many shapes and forms. It's been through coaches. Most recently, it's been through involving myself in different mastermind groups, or just being entrenched and really growing within certain networks and communities. And I found that it's really, whether or not it's focused learning in a setting where it's just a one-on-one conversation, or it's in a group setting that's a little bit more casual and more of a networking, kind of vibe. There's always something to be learned, or something to be reminded of, even things that you might know, might forget, or aren't always so top of mind, and to have those messages come through every so often are so valuable, so valuable. And so I think that my best investment is just keeping an open mind to learning from anywhere and anyone in a way that makes the most sense.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I can just tell in your story and how you interact with people that is probably a large part of what you do every single day. Speaking of learning, books, podcasts, or some sort of learning, articles, anything that's made an impact on you that maybe you can share with our listeners.
Yeah. I mean, I think my favorite book of all time, and this is like, I don't know, I'm surprised at how few people seem to know about this, although I had always just assumed that this was a book that everybody knew about. But my go-to, and the one that I think I even referenced earlier on in this conversation, is the E-Myth. Because as a small business owner, there really is a way in which we build our businesses, and how Michael Gerber breaks it down into the three primary roles is wonderful. And essentially what he says is that there's, a visionary / CEO, there's a manager role, and then there's a technician. And as a small business owner, of course, you're going to have to do all three. But then it's at some point identifying what you're best at amongst those three roles, and then building your business accordingly, that I found to be so exceptionally valuable in my own experience in building, especially CV Ledger. There's so many things to be said, and the way in which you would handle one role versus the other, and identifying where you really fit into the scheme of those three roles. So yeah, I love that book. I'll probably reread it over and over again, every couple of years, but yeah, that's probably my favorite one.
Perfect. My last question for you before we kind of start wrapping things up is, you have this business with your husband, you have your own business, you have your dance and all the things that you do, and yet you have just this very full life. But when you put your head on the pillow at night going to sleep, what is it about any or all of them that kind of brings you the most satisfaction and meaning in your life?
Dance. It's the dance. I mean, and this is where the creative side of me really kind of comes to play. And it's interesting because I have, as I said earlier, like I haven't really focused on the dance so much. And maybe this is why, right? Because I kind of in some ways suppressed it more, for the sake of building a career, building business, making money, and which is great. But then it almost opening that side of myself back up has been a little bit like what feels like the eruption of a volcano, because all of a sudden, it's been this thing that's always been there, kind of just bubbling under the surface. And then all of a sudden to go, okay, I'm intentionally going to do this thing. And for how deeply and how spiritual I feel about it has almost, it's interesting because when I'm not thinking about work, I'm thinking about dance. It's crazy. And it's, like I said, it's not even a thing that I'm trying to make money on, but it's something I love that much. It's crazy. But I think that that's true passion, at its best, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, I'll go to bed thinking about, something as simple as a song, because music has always moved me in that way. When I hear certain pieces of music, it's literally like I can feel it like coursing through my veins. It sounds insane, but as a dancer, that's just how I feel. And, even further than that, I can sometimes just see lines and see choreography. And, I've never really done anything with it until now, and really just all for the sake of self-expression, but it's something I love that much. So that's without question the most passionate I feel about all three.
Well, that's great. And before we close, where can listeners go to find you and all of the different business ventures that you're involved in?
Yeah. I would say probably my Instagram handle, Claire Van Holland, just my whole name, is the best place to find me. And then I don't have a business account for CV Ledger. And that's a whole thing I could go on a diatribe on another day. But, I look at it like this. If people want to work with me or even get to know or understand what I'm about, that's the place to do it. I think that probably best encapsulates who I am as a person, my interests, and I try to keep it well-rounded as much as possible.
Perfect.
Sometimes I'll throw in some finance stuff there, and sometimes I'll throw in even a little bit of dance stuff. But I think that's a good start.
Okay.
And then in terms of accounting and finance stuff, CV Ledger is the best place. CVLedger.com is the best place to find that work. And then to look at the furniture, housevh.com, or also on Instagram at housevh, to get a closer look at all of the wonderful things we're doing there.
Perfect. Well, before we go, this has just been a great interview, and thank you so much for being so open and honest about all the different parts of your life. And I'm just so inspired sitting here listening to all the things you do. And I want to leave you with the last word. So anything else that you'd like to leave us with before we close the show?
Yeah, I would say be fearless. Honestly, life is too short to hold back. So don't hold back. And any chance you get to make things better for yourself, most importantly, then take the leap. It is so scary, but it is 1,000 times over worth every second that follows.
Wow, that was so much fun and packed with so much knowledge and inspiration. And we thank Claire for coming on and being such a great guest today on the show. To find out more about Claire and her business, CV Ledger, you can visit cvledger.com. Also be sure to check out Claire's wood carving and wood designing business with her husband Aaron, which is called Carved, and you can find that at carvedwalls.com. That's KARVD walls.com. Please find, like, and rate us and leave a review on iTunes. That always helps. And you can also sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on shows, new podcasts, and all things to come. And as always, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, keep making that beautiful work. See you soon. Hey everyone, welcome to the super secret ending. You're either here by accident because you forgot to turn off the podcast, or you're a super fan and just want a little bit more. Either way, thanks for being here. This podcast is a labor of love. I absolutely enjoy every part of the editing, putting together process, reaching out to amazing people, and there's some really fun stuff that is planned. If you would like to help support the podcast and all that it takes to put these shows together and you're enjoying it, please consider becoming a Patreon member, which is a completely voluntary way to help support the show and some of the costs that are involved in running it. You can do that by heading to patreon.com/beautifulworkpodcast. That is Patreon, patreon.com/Beautiful Work Podcast, and you can see all the different ways that you'd be able to help out and support the show and keep this thing going. Love what we're doing, and there's a lot of fun stuff planned. And since you're here in the super secret ending, let you guys know now that we're putting together our first series on the Beautiful Work Podcast, which is going to be a week-long look into the whiskey and bourbon industry that is thriving right now in the United States. And we've put together interviews with all sorts of folks who are involved with whiskey and bourbon, both in the United States and worldwide. And we'll be bringing that to you guys in late May. And so have an ear open for that. Well, thanks again. Hope you guys enjoy your week, and we'll see you soon. This is The Real End.